All right, fellas, welcome to my conversation with the one and only Cameron Herold. Many of you in the entrepreneur space would have maybe heard that phrase, I need a Cameron. I need a Cameron. It's a story that's been told, people needing a COO as effective as Cameron Herold. My introduction to Cameron probably came prior to me even meeting him in person, which happened, I think, at a GoBundance event years ago.
Yeah.
But it was John Rulin who kept telling me about Cameron Herold. I think John was actually telling stories about how he connected with you, about, right? Like how he got on your radar.
Yep. John and I met at an entrepreneurs organization event, and it would have been probably 15 years ago now. And he saw me speak at the event, and then kind of waited out in the hallway and stalked me and kind of grabbed me, and then he booked me to come and speak at an event in Cleveland. And just long story short, I ended up being chapter 1 in his book Giftology because of this way that he blew my mind with this crazy gifting experience. So,
dude, can you tell that story in 60 seconds? Because I don't want to leave people hanging.
Yeah, so I had a flight from Vancouver through Chicago to Cleveland. My flight was delayed. I missed my connection. I was supposed to be getting there at about 5 o'clock to go for dinner and a basketball game with John. Long story short, I called him from the airport in Chicago. I'm like, dude, I'm going to be late. He's like, it's okay. When you get here, just go up to your room and change. I go up to my room and change in a huge rush, and my room is completely laid out with Brooks Brothers clothing. And what had happened was John knew that I wanted to also go to Brooks Brothers before dinner, and he found out what my sizes were from me and my assistant, and he literally bought every single item of clothing in the spring collection. So there were like 3 jackets, 2 belts, 3 or 4 pairs of pants, a bunch of sweaters, a dozen shirts. They were all laid out in my room. He paid the store for all those clothing, and then whatever I did not want, the general manager of the Fairmont would bring it back to the Brooks Brothers. Whatever I did want, they would put on my credit card. So he effectively went shopping for me. And I went downstairs to meet him in the bar before going for drinks. And I'm like, I'm completely questioning my sexuality because that's the hottest thing that ever happened with me. And that's how we met. So we became very, very good friends. But crazy enough, I learned about Cutco from John. Then I meet you. Then I meet one of my best friends now, Brad Weimart, who was in Cutco. Right. Hal Elrod came up to me at a Genius Network event and said, hey, would you co-author the Miracle Morning for Entrepreneurs with me? Hal is a Cutco person. Every single person I've met from Cutco has completely blown my mind as being just a straight up amazing human. So they either did well or the cream rose to the top.
Yeah, I even seem to remember, and I might be making this up because it's been so long, but I feel like you were recruiting at one point and you're like, I'm interested in talking to anybody that's Cutco.
I've always wanted to hire a Cutco person specifically for the COO Alliance because a lot of our members come from referrals, and Cutco is very much a referral-based network. And I think anyone that understands referral-based sales could do very well in bringing new members into the COO Alliance. So yeah, I'm still looking for one.
Well, on that note, if I go back in your life a little bit as kind of part of your bio, I remember reading about you building multiple small businesses when you prior to being 18. So that bug kind of bit you early. That was a little bit of like tell me about your relationship with your dad, by the way. This would be the longest introduction because I'm going to keep stopping and then asking you to clarify the story. This is brilliant. I've never done this before. This might become the new template for future shows, but talk to me about that.
I've had a lot of entrepreneurs in my life, and my dad was definitely my first, a lot of mentors. My dad was definitely my first mentor. He groomed my brother and my sister and I to all be entrepreneurs. And for the last 15 to 25 years, my brother, my sister, and myself have all run our own companies. My dad sadly passed away in September very suddenly, but we had a really, really close relationship with him. He was very present as a father, was at all of our activities, embarrassingly would show up at not just our games in sports, but he would even come to practices, which drove us crazy. I'm like, Dad, most parents don't even come to the game and you're sitting at volleyball practice. And so he groomed us to be entrepreneurs. My first business venture, I was 7 years old. I was buying coat hangers or getting coat hangers and selling them to dry cleaners at 7. I did comic book arbitrage. I did a talk that's been on the main TED website called Let's Raise Kids to Be Entrepreneurs.
Yes.
So that's kind of where my entrepreneurial journey started. And then when I was 20, I got involved with a franchise company called College Pro Painters, similar to Cutco. And I was awarded a franchise of that company. And when I was 20, I had 12 full-time employees working for me. So I really cut my teeth very early on at being an entrepreneur.
When I think of you, Cameron, I think of somebody who's very confident, right? And very certain in your words. I remember hearing you speak at GoBundance and having that same sense of the certainty. Where did that begin for you, man? Has it always been there? Is it a natural gift? Did you develop it because of hard times or because somebody taught you this?
Yeah, I think there's a few parts to that. One is I'm still a 13-year-old trapped in an adult body. So there is still that insecurity of youth that's still inside me today, even as a 57-year-old. Some of the skills that my dad trained us in was being able to speak. So we did public speaking competitions. He forced us to do them. In grade 2, I was doing public speaking. He taught us to go door to door and would not go with us. But at the end of a few hours of us going door to door, he would sit down with us and talk about what went well and what didn't go well. And we would role play and we would practice. I used to read radio scripts for his business. And I would read these, I was 10, 12 years old doing radio scripts and had to stand in the living room and record these things on radio or go into the radio station and record them. And that was great practice as a kid. And he liked it because it was this kid talking about his gas station and everybody thought it was really funny. But I just got that practice. And I think from years of running these little entrepreneurial ventures, I had to learn how to sell to adults and pitch with adults and negotiate. I mean, I'll tell you a quick funny story. I was 7 years old. I had the old telephone with like the 30-foot cord in my bedroom, the door closed, and I had the yellow pages open, and I was cold calling dry cleaners, calling them to find out how much they would pay me for coat hangers, because I knew that you could get a recycling fee. And they all wanted to pay it 1 penny or 2 pennies per coat hanger. And I tried to negotiate for 3. And finally, the dry cleaner said, look, I'm only going to give you 2. And I said, how about 2.5? And he starts laughing and he goes, how old are you? And I said, I'm 7. How about 2.5 cents per coat hanger? And he goes, sold, 2.5 cents coat hanger. And then I said, good, I'll see you today. And I hung up the phone and my mom walked in the door and I started crying. And she's like, what's wrong? And I opened up my closet and there were hundreds of coat hangers in there. I'd been going door to door in the neighborhood collecting them, and I was 7. Yeah. And I was negotiating with an adult and understood how to negotiate and split the difference. Like, those are skills that I learned, but my parents let me learn them. And one of my big things I'm frustrated at parents with today is the parents that are walking down the street selling Girl Guide cookies. Let your kid go sell the Girl Guide cookies. Or the parents that buy the lemonade stand and they stand there at the end of the driveway trying to wave cars in so their kid can be successful. Run your own darn lemonade stand. Your right. Kid isn't learning and your kid needs to have, so sit in the house and coach them every 15 minutes, but let them go out and learn. So anyway, yada, yada.
Dude, Ocean, my youngest, is 8. And it was a little while ago. He wanted to go down to South Congress here in Austin, this busier street not far from where we live, and set up a table and sell some of his used toys.
Awesome.
And so, dude, we drove down there. And I'll tell you, first of all, I was exhausted. There was a part of me that was hoping he was going to quit and not want to do this, but he was so persistent.
I love it.
And we went down there. And dude, I was like, how about we park here? Like, Cam, I'm throwing myself under the bus here a little bit as a dad, because I'm like, how about we park here? Just look like an easy parking spot. We would jump out. We would get this done. He'd probably get frustrated and want to go home. And I was so tired. He's like, no, we got to find the busiest spot on the street. So yeah. Dude, he asked me to drive him up and down. He's like, that spot right there. Yes. So we found the spot. He set up a table. I stepped away. Like, I let him do the whole thing, right?
Yeah, if you could go to the other side of the street and sit on a park bench and have coffee, that's perfect.
That's what I did. And he then got frustrated. And then he moved his table directly into traffic. And he found a better spot that had better visibility. And dude, he sold $23 worth of used toys at 8 years old. And it was just one of the greatest moments for him and for me to watch him do this.
You know what's beautiful is that business for him and the way he did it, him picking the location, him moving, him getting frustrated, him learning, him doing it by himself. And the fact that it was a one-day business is perfect. Yeah. But when parents try to print flyers and build a website and tell their friends about it and put it on eBay, the kid gets so frustrated because it's so overwhelming. And I think parents need to let their kids learn from the experiences as well.
Yeah, for sure. How much do you recall, and do you I get this is like maybe difficult to unpack, but how much was your dad, telling you what you're going to do? Like, this is what you're going to do. And how much of it, because I'm imagining there's a bunch of parents out there going, dude, if I ask my kid to read some script, I'm going to be having to arm wrestle him. I'm going to have to threaten to take away everything.
Yeah. So there were things that my dad asked me to do. Like, I want you to record these, commercials, or you're going to come to the office and you're going to work and I'm going to pay you. But all of the little business ventures, sometimes they were ideas. Hey, why don't you go to the golf club and see if you can find a bunch of golf balls and sell them? And I was like, oh, okay, how would I do that? And we'd ask questions, but it was never telling me to do it. There was just ideas, right?
Mm.
But a lot of the ideas were mine, and he would just encourage me to do it, right? Yeah, go do it, go try it, see what happens. I remember there were a few ideas that he had that I didn't want to do. Like, he had these garbage bag holders that you would put on the back of the door under the sink, and he was convinced that people would open it. I'm like, these are stupid. Like, people have garbage, so I didn't want to sell it because I wasn't bought.
Yeah.
He's like, okay, he let it go.
Was he strict?
Oh yeah, they were firm but fair.
Yeah. Would you describe your parenting the same way?
Yes. Yeah,
And
I would describe my parenting as having too short of a fuse, though. I really, I would get frustrated too quickly with my kids. I didn't have enough really good habits in place to control my own temper and control my own frustration. And, stuff would come out too quickly.
That's been my battle, man. I got in Tiger's face yesterday, and I just sat on the couch and felt horrible about it, because I've been working so hard the last 5 years on my emotional intelligence and my patience, and it was not a good display yesterday. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Your boys now are 19 and 21.
Yeah, 19 and almost 22, 21. Yep. My 19-year-old is running his own business in Montreal. And it's interesting, about 4 months ago when he was starting it, I said to one of my friends, yeah, my son has his own little business. And I was like, whoa, why am I saying little business? Like, it's a business, period. Right. Yeah. And watching him is super exciting. Like, the stuff that he's doing, he's running events and parties in Montreal. He just had 380 kids come to an event that he put on last week, and he's negotiating with bars, negotiating with clubs, selling tickets, doing online invoicing. He just called me yesterday. Hey, Dad, how do I issue an invoice to this guy? What does that even mean? I'm like, Google it. Like, I'm not going to give you the answers. Like, look up what an invoice is. And, but it's cool watching watching what they're capable of. I brought him to a mastermind event called the Genius Network when he was 15. And I think that forever changed him. I think he was inspired and seeing all these entrepreneurs and realizing that he had it in him. And I never saw the entrepreneurial traits in him as a kid. I saw the tenacity, but we struggled with our relationship for a few years when younger, due to a divorce that I'd gone through. And he's really kind of opened up. It's fun to watch.
When you look at your entire fatherhood journey, what's one thing that you can identify that your dad did for you and you wanted to do for your kids and you succeeded, so you modeled well? And what's another thing where you're like, my dad didn't do this, he might have fallen short, he failed, and you corrected in your fatherhood journey?
I think one thing my dad did well for us was he was present at all of our games and, practices and stuff like that. And so I made it I really worked hard to be at a lot of my kids' activities. A lot of them, like, standing in the rain at soccer practice when they're 5. And I think where I could have done better was to have kept my phone away and been more present at them. I think at times I was physically there, but I would be listening to a podcast and I'd miss a goal and I'd look over and I'd realize that they were looking over and they could tell that I wasn't quite there. So there was this physical presence, but not necessarily an emotional presence that I wish I'd gotten better at. I remember one day my son, when he was 7, so I'm going to go back, this would have been 14 years ago. So it was right around when the iPhone first came out, and my son walked up to me and he kind of swiped it like to move it out of my face so that I would be present. And so that's something that I had to learn, was just presence isn't just being there, it's actually being there. Right.
Dude, I was at a basketball game for Tiger, who's now 13. This is like 3 years ago. And he made a goal and I was looking at my phone. I made a basket, sorry. And I was looking at my phone and he turned to me and then he came up, he's like, did you see it? I was like, oh, gut wrenching dick punch moment, just horrible.
And that's all they want, right? As kids, is for us to be present. And we have so many other minutes and hours of the day where we're not completely present, that I think that's the hard part, right?
Yeah, for sure. And somebody who, I think a lot of entrepreneurs, and I've heard you talk about this and it's quite funny, the ADD, right? That's a real struggle. Not only do you love your business, but you might be dealing with something like ADD in addition to that.
Yeah, I think most entrepreneurs, so there's only 3% of the US population are entrepreneurs. There's a lot of people that are entrepreneurial. There's a lot of people trying to say they're entrepreneurs, but they're more like freelancers working for lots of businesses. But truly running your own business with employees, there's only 3% of the US population are actually doing that. And only 3% of the population have been diagnosed with true ADHD and bipolar. So those two things I've noticed as traits of entrepreneurs. The ADD is not a disorder for an entrepreneur. It's attention disbursement. So we see everything. We see what's happening with the economy, our suppliers, our customers, the website, the small little problems, but we don't let the stuff really drive us crazy. It just, we notice it, so we delegate it to get it done, right? There's so many opportunities that we have to say yes to them all, but we have to delegate them to get them done. So that momentum creates momentum. What I have noticed is entrepreneurs that tend to be so focused and so perfect don't actually get anywhere with their stuff. Yes. Right? It's the ability to see everything propels us. On the mania of the bipolar side, the mania is why people quit their jobs to join us. It's why they'll invest in us. It's why we'll start things without having the full plan yet. The stress and depression is simply us course correcting and having way too much on our plates and way too much to handle. And we can't tell everybody about it. We can't tell our spouse and our employees and our kids what's really going on. So we have this stress of the business compounding upon us. And I've had people go, well, I'm up and down in life too. Yeah, it's different when you've got your house mortgaged and you're not drawing a salary and you're trying to pretend that you've got everything going, and then you're still not even sure how you're going to meet payroll next week, right? The stress of being an entrepreneur is very, very high.
So back to your bio here, which I think this is actually working quite perfectly. I don't know if I could ever do this in the future on another podcast, but I love how it's all unfolding. So 20s and into your mid 30s, you basically were running, leading, building 3 different companies, at least, doing coaching. You had even coached Elon's brother at one point, Elon Musk's brother.
Yeah.
Anyway, you had done all that.
And his cousin.
And then you met Brian, who, at an EO forum event, which in Front Row Dads, we call those bands. And we have a lot of EO guys that come to Front Row Dads and vice versa. Very similar. Ours is just more family focused.
Sure.
But so you meet Brian, and then ultimately for the next 6 years, you grow 1-800-GOT-JUNK from 2 million to 100 million in 6 years.
Yes. Yeah.
All right. So I got a couple questions in here.
Well, let me walk you through, because there's some key salient points that'll show kind of even how we did it. The first part is college pro painters. So I get involved in this student house painting business. I do very, very successfully as a franchisee. They had 800 franchisees every year. Okay, so they would get 800 university students in North America to be franchisees. I was in the top 5 in Canada. Well, because of that, I got promoted to a general manager, where my job was to go out and recruit, basically sign franchise agreements with and coach 120 franchisees over 4 years. So in doing that, Kimball Musk was one of the franchisees that I recruited. I trained him. I coached him for 6-8 months. I also did the same with his cousin, Peter Reeve, who went on to build Solar City. So I recruited Peter and coached him and trained him. So in 1993, those were just 2 of my 120 franchisees that I coached and trained. I was in the top 30 people at College Pro globally. And every year, those 30 people had to find 800 franchisees in 4 months. Then we had to train them. And then in 1 month, those 800 had to go out and find 8,000 painters. And we would train the 8,000 painters to paint houses. And then between May 1st and August 31st, we would paint $64 million in houses. September 1st, 8,800 kids would quit and go back to school. We'd all get drunk at the head office, and we'd wake up September 2nd and we'd do it again. So I learned systems around scale, around operations, around execution, around people, around marketing, and a lot of those systems are what helped me grow businesses since. So then I got involved with a family friend. We built out what became Gerber Auto Collision in the US and Boyd Auto Body in Canada. It's now a $2 billion collision repair chain. It's the largest collision repair chain in the world. College Pro was the largest residential house painting company in the world. Then I became the president of a private currency company, similar to what Bitcoin is doing today, but we did it 22 years ago. We had 30,000 companies buying and selling using our digital currency instead of the US dollar. So we had Starwood Hotels, Avis Rent-A-Car, Budget Rent-A-Car, Hard Rock Cafe, Bose Stereo, all trading using a digital currency that we created. sold that company at the height of the internet boom. But unfortunately, we sold as a public company and the stock crashed. So our $64 million valuation was worth $3 million. And then I joined Brian, my best friend, as his second in command, and we built a garbage company. So, I was employee number 14. When I left 6.5 years later, we had 3,100 employees system-wide. And as you mentioned, Brian and I were in this EO forum group together for 4.5 years prior to me joining him. He was also my best man at my wedding 3 months before I joined him. So he had a bit of an unfair advantage bringing me in as his second in command because he knew everything about me, and it's like he had a 4.5 year interview.
Yeah. Well, I'm curious, when I think of COOs, or I think of, is it safe to say that COOs in many ways are the integrators? If I'm using the integrator visionary model.
Yeah, if you're using the model from Traction, visionaries and integrators, the second in command, that's why I call the book The Second in Command, is because it could be a VP of operations, a director of operations, an integrator, a COO, president. It's really who is the second in command to the CEO, who's running the company if the CEO is sick for 6 months, or who is the true yin and yang counterpart, to everything the CEO is bad at.
So how did you get to the place where you realized that COO was the right fit for you? Because I see you being this visionary. I see you having a lot of CEO qualities. And so how did you land on COO for yourself?
It's because I had already built a couple of other franchise companies successfully, and I had no intention of being Brian's COO. I joined him originally to coach him and work behind the scenes to teach him and his team how to build the business. What we identified in the first few days was they didn't have the skill set internally to do it. His VP of operations at the time, Jesse Corzan, came to Brian about 2 or 3 days after I started coaching him and said, I won't be able to do anything Cameron needs us to do. I think we should hire him. And so Jesse resigned and I joined as their second in command. Jesse has later got the logo of the company tattooed on his body as a permanent logo. We named a room named after him, but he was very intuitive to understand that there was a lot of stuff that needed to get done. So for the first 4 years, I was very entrepreneurial as a COO. I knew how to build franchise training programs, franchise coaching programs, leadership development programs, build out the marketing team and budgets, build teams. I had done so for the first 4 years. I already knew what to do. It just started getting big for me in year 5 and 6.
Right. And then who did you go to? Who did you start learning from or getting mentored by in that moment?
Yeah, well, we actually got everyone on our leadership team got a formal mentor. Mine was being groomed as the COO at Starbucks. So his name is Greg Johnson. And every month I did a 1-hour call with Greg. Every quarter, he would come and meet with me in person at my office in Vancouver, or I would meet with him at the head office in Seattle. We did that for a period of almost 2 years. I also got involved in a program called Strategic Coach, and I did their 3-year signature program to learn all the systems with Dan Sullivan. So I'd say that those were my 2 big things and then also just absorbing a lot of the content that Brian was getting out of the Gathering of Titans and, Entrepreneurs Organization. So people like Jeff Smart and Brad Smart with Top Grading and Who, and Vern Harnish with his original Rockefeller Habits and Scaling Up, pulling a lot of that content in pretty quickly.
I'm speaking at Gathering of Titans this year. Are you there by chance?
I'm not. I've spoken at it before. Great group.
Yeah. I keep hearing that. How did you?
I'm holding my next September, or this coming September, our COO Alliance event will be held at Endicott House at MIT. So
cool.
The same location. I'll be hosting my group there too.
Dude, that's awesome. How did you build that mentor relationship or that coaching relationship with, I forget his name, of Starbucks?
Yeah. So I tried to identify different companies that I admired that I thought would be similar to 1-800-GOT-JUNK. And Starbucks had multi-unit locations, a great brand, great training program, great leadership development program, not a lot of marketing dollars. So they built off of brand and buzz, good training program. They hired similar people, and they were a premium price for a commoditized product. Identical to 1-800-GOT-JUNK, right? In every single case. So I went online, this was back in 2004, and I found their org chart, or names of people on their leadership team, and identified 3 people who were on their leadership team that had titles similar to what I thought I would be looking for, executive VP, VP operations, et cetera. And there was no social media, there was no Facebook or anything back then. So I sent an email to all of our franchisees And I said, does anybody know, any of these three people at Starbucks, or does anyone know anyone at Starbucks? And one of our franchisees, who was his name is Drew Boyles. He's now the mayor in El Segundo, California. Drew was a franchisee for 1-800-GOT-JUNK. And Drew said, not only do I know those three people, but I used to report to this guy, Greg, and two of them would be the wrong people. I know them and I know the business areas. Greg is the one you want. I'll introduce you to him. And with one email, he introduced me to Greg.
So great.
But the reason Greg said yes was this. I sent Greg an email and I said, here are the 5 areas I want to get better at personally. And here's the 10 areas I want to get better at in business. If this sounds like you, please say yes. If it's not you, please say no. And I can't pay you. This needs to be your turn to give back. And Greg said when he read the list, I was the only person who ever said, can you mentor me, and explaining what I actually wanted? Because so many people don't put the thought into it, and they kind of shoot their shot too early.
That's right. Oh man, that's so cool. I'm glad I asked that. So Cameron, all right. So you build 1-800-GOT-JUNK.
Mm-hmm.
In 2016, you start the COO Alliance.
Yeah.
Right? Okay. Which is your primary focus right now?
It is. Yeah, very much so. It's really the only network of its kind in the world for the second in command. The reason I started it was there were all of these groups for CEOs, right? We've got, Front Row Dads, we've got the Genius Network, we've got YPO and Entrepreneurs Organization and Vistage and Maverick and GoBundance and Baby Bathwater and War Room. It's like, there's a gazillion groups for entrepreneurs.
Yep.
And then there were groups for marketers and lawyers and engineers. In fact, there's actually a trade association called the Association of American the American Society of Association Executives. It's got 5,500 trade associations as members. But there was no trade association, there was no network, there was no community for the second in command. So I would keep going to these entrepreneur groups to try to learn, and I didn't fit in. I wanted to sit and talk about interviewing and recruiting and hiring for 6 hours, and entrepreneurs are onto their 12th issue after 6 hours. So that was the whole impetus for starting it. And then I also had a few of my coaching clients, companies that I was working behind the scenes coaching, larger companies, about 400 employees each. And 3 of them had COOs that I was coaching, and those 3 wanted to meet with each other. So I just said, well, if we can get 10 of us together, for a weekend, we'll run a group. And I said, it's $6,700 if the 10 of you come. And all 10 people paid $6,700, and I had 10 people signed up the next day, literally 25 hours later. So we ran it, and 9 of those 10 wanted to keep meeting. And that was cool. The starting point.
And now today, how does that program work? How do people get involved? If there's somebody listening that has a COO, which I know there's a bunch of people listening that do, or they are COOs.
It's any company that does minimum 5 million in revenue to qualify. So you have to be a real company, 5 million in revenue. It's whoever is second in command to the CEO. It's only 1 per company. So it could be a VP Ops, it could be a president, it could be COO, whatever. We're title agnostic. We've got members from 17 countries, and 40% of our members are women. The model is we have a 3-hour event every month of the year online via Zoom. And then we also have 2 in-person events a year that you can opt into attending, but you don't have to attend those. One's in Scottsdale, one's at MIT. Membership is $8,900 a year to join, and then it's $4,900 per in-person event if you want to come to those as well.
Yeah,
that's it. And then they also have a closed private Slack community that they all interact with each other, daily and in between events as well.
All right, let's talk about the book. How was that process, putting that together for you?
And we're talking on, this is launch day technically as well.
That's right. This is.
So whenever you go live, the book launched January 24th. This is the most important book I've ever written for a couple of reasons. There's not a lot of content out there that was written for how do you go out and attract and find and onboard and build a relationship with the COO. And I had a lot of IP because of running the COO Alliance. And then I also have a podcast called the Second in Command Podcast, where I've interviewed 245 second in commands of brands that we all know. Like I've had the second in command of Shopify, of Bumble, the Cleveland Indians, Asana, like really great brands, second in commands. And because of understanding them and their journey and what makes them strong, I tried to include a lot of that in the book as well.
Yeah. And so, if I ask your kids, let's bring the
Mm,
kids back into this for a moment.
yeah.
What is dad's book about? Do they get it? Are they interested? Are they paying attention? Are they asking you questions? Or are they just like, it's my dad, I'm going to go learn from somebody else?
They know what a lot of my books are about, because this is my 6th book.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if they know what this one's about. I'm not sure if I've even talked to them about this book. One of the things I've worked really hard on is, if people ask my kids, what does your dad do? I'm trying to get them to answer things like travel and hiking and golfing and skiing. Oh, to make money? Oh yeah, he coaches companies and he
Right.
has this community for seconds in command. But I want them to think of their dad as work coming second, not work coming
Yes.
first.
Yes.
Right? I want them to talk about how I'm there with them and I do stuff with them and I think about them, versus just like, I'd like Burning Man to come up in the conversation before my books.
Interestingly, that's exactly how Front Row Dads came to be. Was I was at a party and somebody asked me what I did, and I answered that I'm a father and I'm a husband, and when I'm not doing that, I do these other things. And they were like, that's the coolest answer. The problem in my mind when I left that party was that's not how my calendar would have reflected that
Right.
statement.
Right.
So the quest then became, how do we become family men with businesses, not businessmen with families?
With families.
And yeah. And that became the primary switch. So I appreciate you saying that. I think a lot of
Yeah.
bios, by the way, are that way also. It's like, they did this, they accomplished this, they ran this marathon. And then at the bottom, it's like, by the way, they happen to be married and have a couple kids. And it's like this afterthought of like, of their life, of what it all means.
Well, and it's interesting. Like, if I read my dad's obituary, what he did for work was secondary to what he was doing for life, right?
Yeah.
His life was much more primary. So I'll give you something that worked really well for me to be very, very focused and present on my kids. Is every year at the end of a calendar year, at the end of every school year, the school publishes next year's calendar. So in June, you have all of next year's calendar already published by the school. So I put all of their breaks into my calendar. I'd put their spring break in, their reading break. I put their holidays, their Christmas holidays. All of those dates were blocked off in my calendar, knowing when they were. I knew when their PD days were, like when they had that one random day of the month that they weren't in school. Those were all blocked off in my calendar. And then we blocked off our family vacations. We blocked off our time at the cottage. We blocked off our Christmas trip. We blocked off our summer trip. Those were blocked off as well. As soon as my kids signed up for sports, their practices and their game days and et cetera, were all put into my calendar. My ex-wife and I, even when we got divorced, did this. We had a shared calendar and all their activities went into my calendar so that my assistant would book stuff around those activities. It wasn't like, I hope I can make their game. It's like, I hope I can do another call today because I have their game this afternoon, right?
Yeah.
Those things were in my calendar first as kind of the big rocks, and everything else came second.
Is there anything in second in command that applies to family as well as it does in work? Can you think of a principle, a concept, a framework, a story that somebody who's a COO would read it and go, that's not only great for my business, but that's also great for my family?
Well, I took a lot of how, building a traditional marriage applies, to have a good relationship with your spouse and have a good relationship with your kids. And I brought that into the book. It's almost the inverse, where I think about if you're going to have a second in command, you need to have a complete amount of trust. You need to have a great amount of communication. You need to shine the spotlight on each other. You need to be able to argue and be stressed and frustrated, but not in front of the kids, because the kids need to see you as a force together. You need to have date night time away from the kids. So all of those things that work in a traditional marriage work really well for the CEO and the COO as well.
Yeah. This might be too personal of a question, but we'll see. What did you learn from your first marriage to your recently married? What's different about Cameron and what you bring to the relationship? How have you evolved? What have you learned?
Well, I've got an ex-wife, and then I had the sequel, which was my second wife, and this is my best wife. So this is my third. And I never thought that this would be me or my story. I thought that I was going to be the person who got married and was together forever, like my parents were and my grandparents were. Not my story. I knew on my wedding day with my ex-wife that it was wrong. I knew that it wasn't something that I was that passionate about and that I was that into. And I think she recognized that as well. But we were both very different people, and we held on to each other as kind of a rock. My mom was dying at the time, and so I held on to something that was stable, I think. And then we conceived. We conceived on our honeymoon, and I remember, learning that she was pregnant and me going, oh shit. And I stayed for 10 years, but I was lonely. So I stayed for the kids. And then I realized that my kids were never going to see a dad who was in love and was happy. And that wasn't who I wanted to role model. I wanted them to see, I remember my dad walking into the kitchen and kind of slapping my mom on the butt and giving her a hug and a kiss and them laughing and her going, oh, John, and being all embarrassed. I remember that vividly, and my kids would have never seen that. So, split up with their mom, extraordinarily painful, super hard for me, super hard for them. Started dating a woman that I was madly in love with. And I threw her in front of the kids too early. I was so excited about her and I wanted them to like her and I wanted her to like them. I kind of launched into that relationship a little early and we didn't do it very well. But they saw passion and they saw love and they saw friendship and they saw activities and they saw, their dad certainly, in that relationship for a bunch of years. And just in learning from that one, it was tough because her kids were in the US and my kids were in Canada and I was trying to juggle going back and forth and it was too much. I was fried and trying to build a business. And so then it was, switch gears. And how do you find somebody else who's at a different stage? And my wife now is happy and active and successful and loves to travel and doesn't want to have kids and doesn't want to be a mom to mine. She just wants to be their friend and wants to be involved, but has no desire to necessarily have her own. So we're at a good stage to be able to do that. So I'm just growing and evolving. And now I see them as just really defined chapters of my life versus, like anything else.
I'm really happy for you. I'm really happy for you. And thanks for telling us that because, man, it's, and I know I'm not the first to say this, but it's the mess in the message that I think I resonate with so much. And maybe that's because I feel like there's so much mess in my life, and has been as a 47-year-old now, that there's just been a lot of things that haven't worked out and things that, and I realize there's a lot of ways we can flip that and frame that. And there are no failures. There's only learning opportunities and all that. But I would just call them dark moments or hard moments, or, these are storms that we go through, and knowing a few of yours really helps me feel more connected to you. And so I really appreciate that.
Thank you. Appreciate
it. In this season of life, your boys being 19 and 21, you're recently, you're newly, can I say newly married or?
Yeah, we got married back in May. Yeah.
Yeah. So newly married. Your business sounds like it's just thriving and you got this book out there. What's your hope for the future, man? What do you want for the rest of 2023? What does wildly successful look like for you? What does the book do? What's happening right now and what's to come?
I'm trying to get the balance back again, to be able to balance business and personal with my wife and our travel, which is a little bit insane at times, and being able to see my kids who are, out of the house and starting their own journeys as adults. So it's trying to balance that out, and that's not always easy, but really staying very focused on that. So trying to set up proper trips with my kids and time to visit them, and trying to say no to certain things as well. I'm saying no to a lot of speaking events that I used to say yes to, and now it pretty much has to be over Zoom or a massive group that strategically makes sense. So I'm saying no to some of those, and then I'm landing some of the right ones. We're going to be over in Egypt in March, and the Entrepreneurs Organization in Cairo just booked me.
That's cool.
That's a hell yes. I'm local. I get to see everybody. I get paid, meet a bunch of entrepreneurs. So I'm saying yes to some strategic things. And we're also trying to plug into some really fun communities. So my wife and I are going to a baby bathwater event in Croatia. We're going to a Wayfinders entrepreneur event in Uganda. We're going to the main 5-day TED conference again. This will be my 10th year in Vancouver for 5 days. So we're plugging into those kinds of events and communities, which is fun because it feeds us.
That's
so saying
cool.
yes to some of those.
Mike Brisick just became a front row dad, by the way.
Great guy.
You mentioned Wayfinders. He does.
Yeah, we went to his event in Bhutan earlier this year, and yeah, Mike gave me this bracelet that I'm wearing right now. Great guy.
That's cool, man. Great human. Love his business model. That's really cool. Do you have goals for the book, or do you know what success looks like, or are you just having fun with it?
No, I do. I mean, so I've always hit Amazon #1 bestseller statuses. That doesn't really matter. I mean, it was 9 o'clock this morning and I was already #1 in 5 categories on Amazon, on launch day. It's not about that for me. I'm not trying to hit a Wall Street Journal or New York Times bestseller list. I wanted to write a really good book. I wanted to make sure that a lot of people knew about it. Now, strategically, this book definitely fits into my business more than the others, right? So it's positioned and called the Second in Command. It ties into my Second in Command podcast. It ties into the COO Alliance. It's certainly a really good marketing tool for the COO Alliance. So it explains what we does. So I'm definitely putting more marketing power behind it, because I know that, if I land one client, that's $14,000 is the lifetime value. So I can spend 28 grand marketing the book. I'll certainly land 2 clients out of it. So I think it's more just really pushed for this to be a good, strong, hard book. So we're pushing to get 100 Amazon reviews as soon as possible, pushing to get a lot of social media exposure from our members as soon as possible. And I'm just, wanted to make sure it was a great book. It is by far, of the 6 books I've written, I'd say it's the best of all the 6 for sure.
So I'm very excited to listen to the book first. I know that it's on Audible. I saw that. I didn't have time to get to it before this chat, but
yeah.
Give us something from the book. Like, give us a lesson. What's one of your favorite? What do you love to talk about or teach, so that guys can hear maybe something from the book? Give us a highlight.
I'll give you one. And this is something I learned from another friend of mine, Jack Daly. And he said that, so often companies go out and I need a second in command. I need a second in command. It's like, well, do you have an executive assistant? Oh, no. Well, if you don't have an executive assistant, you are one. So, yes. Before you hire a second in command, at least hire a second, an executive assistant to get you started. The second part is, and you said it kind of at the very beginning, was, I need a Cameron. I need a Cameron. I came off a stage, Vern Harnish's event 10 or 12 years ago. And this guy walked up to me, he said, "You're Cameron?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "I thought you were a saying." And I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Everybody at this conference, 300 entrepreneurs, have been talking for 3 days that they need a Cameron. I thought it was like, I need a BHAG, I need a Vivid Vision." So I thought it was a thing. I didn't know it was a person. I'm like, "You're ridiculous." And he goes, "No." He goes, "Now I realize they were just saying, like, Brian had you, they needed you." And what I learned from that was, a COO cannot just be plugged into another company and you can expect them to be perfect. It's a much harder fit than you think. I would have been a horrible COO for 90% of my COO Alliance members, and they would have been a horrible COO at 1-800-GOT-JUNK. I was the right COO at 1-800-GOT-JUNK from 2 million to 106 million. I would have been the wrong one to take us to the billion. And their current COO, Eric Church, he and I have known each other since 1987. We started a fraternity together in Ottawa in 1987. I was president for the first year. He was president the second year. He's been their COO for the last 9 years. He would have been horrible for the first 6 years because he didn't have any of the franchising experience. He didn't have the entrepreneurial experience. So what I learned in writing this book is that the COO has to be the right fit culturally, has to be the right fit with the CEO, has to have the right skill sets for the size of the company and what needs to get done. But often they're also for a season, right? A COO can be kind of for the reason, for the season, or for the lifetime. It's very rare that they're there for the lifetime of the company. It's more that they're there for a reason or the season.
Is the book more geared towards, hey, you're a COO, you pick up this book and I'm going to teach you how to be a badass COO? Or would a CEO want to read this from the perspective of like, hey, this is, how to work with a COO? And maybe it's one and the same thing, right?
It's both. Yeah. Originally, I was going to write it so that, the first half of the book would be for the CEO on how to hire one. And then if you flipped it over, it would be for the COO and how to get in. And then logistically, it was becoming a nightmare. So I'm like, screw it, we'll just write one book. You can read it through both lenses, right? If you're the entrepreneur, it will show you for sure how to go out and recruit one and how to onboard them and how to build a good relationship with one. If you already have a good COO, it'll teach you how to build a stronger relationship and a better business with them. If you're a COO or you want to become a COO, it'll show you what good companies are looking for and how to identify the right fits. It'll show you, from that perspective as well. So it's kind of for both.
Yeah. We're coming up against our time, and I really appreciate you being here, Cameron. This has been fun to get to know you on a more personal level, but also understand your business even more. I can only imagine this is going to be very useful to a lot of the members in our group, since we tend to attract a lot of people who would need or want a COO in their life. Is there anything else you want to say, man? Open to communicate to the crew.
Yeah,
what do you want them to know that we didn't talk about today?
I'll say 2 parts. One is that you just touched on something that is a critical reason why hiring a second in command can be so powerful. It can actually give you the time to have a life, right? Yes. It can free up the time to spend with your kids and your relationship and yourself. And we only start a company for one of three reasons: to give us cash, to give us free time, or to put a stake in the sand, like a flag in the ground, and say, we did it, right? Like, look at me, ma. And that's the only reason we start a company. Well, if you're running a company today and you don't have enough time to have a good life or spend time with your spouse or spend time with your kids, you're either avoiding something, you're worried about the pain, or you're worried about the struggle, you're worried about the hard shit, or you're getting so fulfilled from the business that you don't have anything in your life to get fulfilled from. And you should, because the second part of my message is none of this actually matters. This is just what we do to make money. Like, we're all going to die, right? We're, as Ram Dass said, we're just all walking each other home. And I think we need to remember that we're supposed to have fun along this journey. We're supposed to have a good time. We're not supposed to take all this so seriously. And when we take this all so seriously, that's where a lot of the stress in our lives comes from.
And one last piece about raising kids, since yours are now 19 and 21, as we've said a couple times, what advice do you have for the dads out there that might be at an earlier stage with their kids?
Man, like, people will tell you, and you'll hear it all the time, it goes fast. Fuck, it goes fast. And at 14, 15, 16, they start having their friends and they start wanting to spend time with their friends. And, it's just spend time with them, man. Build and spend time with them to build the relationship with them, to keep the relationship and the communication open, because you need them to be able to come to you when they're scared and they're afraid and they're worried and they're insecure and they're nervous. And if they're trying to live up to this somehow level of perfection, because a lot of us, especially front row dads, are doing well in our businesses, in our lives, that's a very high bar for our kids to try to achieve. And it can add a lot of pressure to them that we don't even see we're doing.
Yeah. Cameron, thanks for being here, man. Imagine anywhere books are sold, go pick up a copy of Second in Command.
Definitely go check it out on Amazon, Audible, iTunes. Second in Command is there. Check out the Second in Command podcast, and then absolutely go over to COOalliance.com. If you qualify, we should really get your Second in Command to join as well. It's their tribe. There's no entrepreneurs are allowed in either. It's just for COOs.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you, Cameron. It's been a lot of fun, man. If I can be a resource to you in your journey, please don't hesitate to reach out. So many people that I know are just huge fans of yours. It's fun to spend time with individuals who your friends just keep talking about. And you're like, what is it about this guy? And, it's been fun for me. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, John. I appreciate the time.
Yeah. Well, talk to you soon, my friend.
Thank you.